The grand ballroom was shining under bright chandeliers. Crystal glasses sparkled on polished tables, and the sound of laughter and clinking silverware filled the air. Guests were dressed in the finest clothes. Women wore elegant gowns that shimmered as they moved, and men were in sharp suits. The atmosphere was full of sophistication, but also a quiet sense of judgment. Everyone seemed to be watching each other, sizing each other up, whispering and laughing quietly among themselves. In the corner of the room, near the massive windows, stood a grand piano. Its polished black surface reflected the lights, making it look even more magnificent. The piano was a centerpiece in the room, meant to impress, and it usually belonged to professional musicians who were invited to play for the guests. Tonight, however, something unexpected was about to happen. A young girl walked quietly into the ballroom. She was small, dressed in simple clothes that were clean but clearly not expensive. Her shoes were neat but plain, and her hair was tied back in a simple braid. She did not carry herself with arrogance or pride. Instead, there was a calm confidence in her steps. She moved slowly, carefully, as if she did not want to disturb anyone or draw attention to herself. Some guests noticed her immediately. A few whispered to each other, hiding smiles behind their champagne glasses. "Who let her in here?" one woman whispered. Another man chuckled. "She looks completely out of place." Their laughter was quiet, but it carried a sense of superiority. They thought she was just a poor girl, curious about the fancy event, and perhaps hoping for attention. The girl did not seem to notice the whispers or laughter. She walked past the crowd and stopped in front of the grand piano. Her eyes rested on it for a moment, as if she were greeting an old friend. She gently lifted the piano bench and sat down. The guests who had been watching could hardly believe it. "She's really going to touch it?" one of them murmured, shaking his head. Her fingers hovered above the keys, delicate but firm. She didn't rush, didn't show any nervousness. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment and took a deep breath. The room, filled with chatter and laughter, seemed to slow around her. Some people turned back to their conversations, shaking their heads at her audacity. Others, however, felt a strange curiosity building inside them. The first few notes she played were soft, almost tentative. But even those early notes carried a certain clarity and emotion that made people pause. The girl's hands moved with precision, each note ringing clear and true. She didn't play a song anyone in the room recognized immediately. Instead, she created something entirely her own. A melody that seemed to float in the air, reaching every corner of the room. Yet gentle enough not to startle anyone, people began to stop talking. The laughter faded into silence, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity. Guests looked around at each other, confused. They had laughed at her just moments ago, but now something had changed. The music was different. It was not flashy or loud, but it was powerful. It spoke to everyone who heard it, even those who did not know how to play a single note. A few guests moved closer, trying to get a better view of the girl. They wanted to see who she was, to understand how someone so young and simple-looking could create such beautiful sound. Her fingers moved gracefully, pressing the keys with a mix of strength and tenderness. Every note seemed to tell a story, some happy, some sad, some full of longing. The girl's expression was calm, almost serene. She did not glance at the audience, did not smile or show off. She played simply because it was what she loved. She lost herself in the music, and the room, once full of chatter, now followed her. People who had been gossiping about each other were now united by the melody that floated through the air. Even the most judgmental guests could not look away. A few children who had been quietly playing in a corner sat down on the floor, mesmerized. Even the staff, who were used to seeing wealthy guests behave in certain ways, were stunned. One waiter accidentally dropped a tray, and no one seemed to notice. Because everyone's attention was completely on the girl and the music, time seemed to slow as she continued to play. Her hands moved almost effortlessly, but it was clear that every movement was intentional. Each note had meaning. Each chord built upon the last, creating a story that no one could quite put into words, but everyone could feel. It was as if the piano itself had come alive through her fingers, speaking directly to the hearts of those who were listening. Some guests began to whisper in awe. "She's amazing," one woman breathed. Another man nodded, still trying to hide his shock. The first moments of laughter and ridicule were gone, replaced by something entirely new: respect and wonder. No one wanted to interrupt, no one dared speak. The music had taken over the room completely. Even the event organizers, who were used to orchestrating every detail perfectly, felt a chill of surprise. They had not invited anyone like her, and yet here she was, commanding the attention of the entire gala without a word. Her talent was undeniable. It was raw, natural, and powerful, all at the same time. As the music continued, the girl's fingers moved faster, but never clumsily. Each note was measured, each pause deliberate. Guests who had initially looked down on her now exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they had misjudged her. Their laughter, their whispers, and their assumptions had been completely wrong. Her melody changed subtly, growing richer, more complex. The sound filled the room, touching every listener differently. Some felt happiness, some felt nostalgia, and some felt a strange sadness that made them want to remember their own lives in a deeper way. It was more than just music, it was emotion made audible, and the girl was the storyteller. People who had been confident in their judgments were now unsure. They realized that appearances could be misleading. The girl's simple dress, her quiet manner, her unassuming presence all had hidden the truth of her extraordinary talent. She did not need to shout or perform theatrically to command attention. The music itself was her voice, and it was enough. Even as she played, she seemed unaware of the effect she was having. She did not look up, did not glance at the crowd, and did not smile for applause. She was completely absorbed in her own world, in the piano, in the notes that were flowing from her fingers. It was a rare kind of focus, a mix of passion and dedication that could not be taught, only felt and lived. The first part of her performance set the tone for what would come next. The crowd, once judgmental and mocking, was now quiet, almost reverent. They could sense that something remarkable was happening in front of them, and though they didn't yet understand the full extent of her talent, they knew that their initial laughter had been premature. The girl continued playing, each note more confident than the last. The audience began to sense a story emerging from the music. It was as if the piano was speaking the girl's own life, her struggles, her dreams, her hopes, and her quiet determination. Even those who did not know her could feel the honesty and authenticity in every chord. She struck. By the time she reached the end of this first piece, the room was completely silent. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a kind of awe that no one could ignore. People stared, some with tears in their eyes, some with mouths slightly open, and all with hearts touched by something they could not explain. In that moment, the young girl had achieved something extraordinary. She had turned skepticism into admiration, laughter into respect, and a room full of strangers into an audience deeply moved by her talent. Without saying a single word, she had captured the hearts of everyone present, and though she would go on to play even more, this first part of her performance had already set the stage for the story that would leave everyone stunned. The audience had learned a lesson they would not forget. Talent, heart, and passion can never be judged by appearances. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room can have the loudest voice. The room was still, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where there had been laughter and whispers of judgment, now there was a heavy sense of curiosity and wonder. People couldn't believe what they had just heard. A girl who looked so ordinary, so unassuming, had created music that filled the room with emotion. Her first piece had captured attention, but no one yet realized that she had only just begun. She took a brief pause, just enough to let the echo of her last note fade into silence. Her hands hovered over the keys again, and the guests instinctively leaned in. Some held their breath, afraid to disturb the moment. It was as if the piano itself had taken on a life of its own through her fingers. Every guest, from the wealthiest business person to the youngest child in the corner, felt drawn into the melody before it even began. When she started again, the music was different. It was stronger, more confident, but still full of subtle emotion. The melody moved in waves, rising and falling with a natural rhythm that seemed to speak directly to the listeners' hearts. She played with a freedom that was mesmerizing. No sheet music, no guidance, only her intuition and her talent guiding each note. Guests who had been skeptical moments before now watched in complete silence. Even those who had been gossiping, mocking, or laughing quietly were unable to look away. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. It was impossible to ignore the skill, the passion, and the depth of feeling in her playing. The piano no longer felt like just an instrument. It felt like an extension of her soul. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. They felt emotions they hadn't expected to feel at a fancy event like this. Happiness, sorrow, nostalgia, and hope all mingled together in a way that was both gentle and overwhelming. Each guest interpreted the music in their own way, but all shared a common understanding. This was extraordinary. The girl's hands moved quickly across the keys, but there was no rush. Each note was deliberate, purposeful, and full of expression. She played with a balance of strength and delicacy that left the audience spellbound. The notes seemed to form sentences, and the sentences formed stories that were not told with words but with feelings. A few of the older guests whispered to each other. "She's only a child," one said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've never heard anyone play like that in my life," another replied. Even the professional musicians in the room, who had been performing for years, looked stunned. One quietly muttered under his breath, "How is this possible?" The girl's music began to take on a dramatic tone. She built tension with sudden, bold notes, followed by moments of soft reflection. The contrast made the audience lean forward in their chairs, completely absorbed. Every subtle pause, every gentle trill added to the story she was telling. The music wasn't just playing in the room. It was moving through it, touching everyone present. Even those who didn't understand music technically felt it deeply. The rhythm, the flow, the emotion, it was universal. Guests found themselves holding back tears, some unconsciously gripping their hands to stop them from shaking. They were moved by the honesty of her playing, by the raw emotion that came naturally from her without any showmanship or pretense. The children who had been sitting quietly on the floor were now completely captivated. They had never seen someone play like this before. Some of them had played a piano for a short time in school, but nothing they had heard compared to what this girl was creating. They watched her hands move like magic, and their young faces reflected wonder and admiration. The staff in the room, who were used to seeing formal events and wealthy guests behaving in certain ways, were equally amazed. Waiters froze mid-step, unsure whether to continue serving. Even the organizers of the gala, who prided themselves on control and perfection, realized that they were witnessing something beyond their planning or expectations. As the piece continued, the music became more emotional. It carried the weight of untold stories, the struggles of a life not yet fully lived, and the quiet strength that comes from overcoming challenges. The audience could feel it in their bones. Every note seemed to resonate with personal experiences, and each guest found themselves reflecting on moments in their own lives. Some of the wealthiest attendees, who had moments ago been judging the girl based on her appearance, now felt a wave of humility. They had been so sure they knew who she was, so sure of their assumptions, but now all of that had vanished. They realized that they had been wrong to laugh, wrong to judge, and wrong to assume that talent could be measured by outward appearances. The girl played as if she were speaking to each person individually. Each chord carried a message of honesty, courage, and quiet determination. It was clear that she was not performing for fame, recognition, or praise. She played because she had to, because music was her language, and the piano was the way she communicated her heart to the world. A soft gasp went through the room as she played a particularly delicate passage. The notes were light, almost fragile, yet full of precision and control. The audience felt themselves leaning in closer, as if afraid that the next sound might disappear before they could catch it. They felt connected to her in a way that words could never achieve. Even the professional pianist, who had been scheduled to perform later, now watched in silent awe. He had studied music for decades, but what he saw was not just technique, it was soul. The way her hands moved, the way she expressed emotion, And the way she commanded the attention of the room without a single word, it was something rare, something extraordinary. By now, the initial whispers and judgments were completely gone. There was no room for doubt, no room for laughter. The entire gala was united in this shared experience, bound together by the music that seemed to come from another world. People who had been strangers to one another moments ago were now connected by the emotion in the room. The girl's confidence grew as she played. Each note she struck was cleaner, stronger, and more expressive than the last. She didn't rush or try to impress. She simply allowed her talent to flow naturally, and the audience could feel that. They were not being entertained, they were being moved. They were not watching a performance, they were witnessing a gift. Some guests whispered apologies to each other, feeling ashamed for their earlier laughter. "I can't believe we judged her like that," one said quietly. Another nodded. "We were wrong. Completely wrong." But the girl didn't notice or react. She remained focused, completely absorbed in the music, and completely unaware of the effect she was having on the crowd. The music began to change tone again, this time slower and more reflective. The notes carried a sense of longing and hope intertwined, like someone telling a story of struggle and triumph without words. Guests felt a lump in their throats. They wanted to applaud, but the moment was too delicate, too fragile to interrupt. They simply listened, hearts open, absorbing every sound. As the piece approached its conclusion, the girl's fingers moved more swiftly, yet gracefully. The music built to a gentle climax, not with noise or grandeur, but with quiet power that demanded attention. The audience could feel the emotion reaching its peak, and they knew that this moment would stay with them long after the gala ended. Finally, she struck the last note, a single soft sound that lingered in the air. The room was silent for a heartbeat, as if no one dared break the spell. Then, slowly, the guests began to realize what had happened. Their hearts were full, their minds blown, and their spirits moved. They had witnessed something they would never forget. The applause began quietly at first, hesitant, almost shy. Then it grew louder, filling the room with sound that celebrated not just the music, but the talent, the courage, and the soul of the young girl at the piano. People stood, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling broadly, all united in appreciation. The girl rose from the piano bench, not with arrogance, but with quiet dignity. She acknowledged the crowd with a humble nod, her eyes calm, her face serene. She had not sought attention, yet she had captured the hearts of everyone present. The gala had begun with laughter and judgment, but it had ended with admiration, respect, and awe. In that moment, it was clear to everyone that the girl's music had done more than entertain. It had taught a lesson about assumptions, about appearances, and about the power of true talent. The audience had learned something invaluable, that greatness often comes quietly, and that sometimes the most remarkable people are those we least expect. And as the guests continued to applaud, some even whispering to one another about the wonder they had witnessed, the girl quietly stepped away from the piano, her heart full, her purpose fulfilled. She had shared her gift with the world, and in doing so, had left an impression that would last far beyond the walls of the ballroom. The room was alive with emotion, but the girl was far from finished. She returned to the piano with a quiet determination, her hands brushing the keys lightly as if greeting old friends. The first two pieces had captured the audience's attention and hearts, but now she intended to leave them speechless. The energy in the room had shifted. Where once there had been whispers and judgment, there was now anticipation. Every guest knew something remarkable was about to unfold. She began to play again, but this time the music was different. It was bold, confident, and commanding. The melody rose and fell like waves, strong yet gentle, delicate yet full of power. Each note seemed carefully chosen to create a story, a journey that the audience could feel in their hearts. The change in tone surprised many. The music was no longer just beautiful, it was breathtaking. Guests leaned forward in their seats, some unconsciously holding their breath. They could feel the intensity in every chord. The piano seemed to vibrate with life, resonating in the chest and soul of everyone present. The girl's fingers moved with incredible speed, yet there was no confusion or disorder. Each movement was precise, controlled, and full of emotion. Her music spoke without words, yet every listener understood it perfectly. Some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the room exchanged glances of disbelief. Their earlier laughter seemed almost shameful now. They had judged her based on appearances, assuming that someone so quiet and simple-looking could not possibly hold such talent. And yet, here she was, commanding the attention of the entire room with a power that no money, status, or influence could match. The melody she played grew more complex, weaving in layers of harmony that made the music feel alive. The sound seemed to reach into the past, touching memories long forgotten. Some guests felt tears pricking their eyes as they remembered moments of joy, loss, or love. Others felt a strange sense of hope, as if the music were telling them that no matter their struggles, something beautiful was always possible. The children in the corner were now sitting completely still, wide-eyed, their small faces reflecting wonder. They had never seen anyone play like this. Some of them had taken piano lessons at school, but they could sense immediately that this was different. The girl was not simply performing notes. She was creating magic. Her music was alive, and everyone in the room could feel it. Even the staff, who were accustomed to formal events, were mesmerized. A few waiters had paused mid-step, unsure whether to continue their work. Some stood frozen, captivated by the beauty and power of the music. For them, this was no ordinary night. They were witnessing a rare and unforgettable moment, one that would remain in their memory forever. The professional pianist who had been scheduled to perform later was watching in complete awe. He had studied music for decades, performed in countless venues, and yet he had never seen anything like this. The technical skill was extraordinary, but it was the emotion behind it, the raw, honest, unpretentious passion that left him speechless. He whispered under his breath, "She is extraordinary, beyond words." As the piece progressed, the girl began to play faster, her fingers moving with incredible agility, but never losing control. Each note landed with perfect timing, creating a rhythm that carried the audience forward, almost like a heartbeat. The music had momentum, but it was still full of emotion, telling a story that was invisible yet vividly present in every listener's mind. Guests felt a connection to the girl that went beyond admiration. They were part of her story now, each note touching their own lives in some way. Some clutched their hands to their chests, feeling the emotion resonate deeply. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, unable to resist the pull of the melody. The room was no longer a ballroom full of strangers. It was a shared experience, united by the girl and her music. A soft gasp swept through the audience as the girl struck a particularly high, clear note. The sound seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with a power that went beyond the ordinary. People instinctively leaned forward, as if trying to catch every single vibration of the sound. Even those who had been skeptical, judgmental, or dismissive at the start were now leaning closer, unable to believe what they were hearing. The girl's music shifted again, this time slowing slightly. The notes became more deliberate, softer, yet no less powerful. There was an intimacy in the sound, as if she were speaking directly to each person individually. Guests could feel their own emotions reflected back to them, and it was impossible not to be moved. Some reached for tissues, quietly wiping away tears they had not expected to shed. The contrast between the soft passages and the powerful crescendos made the performance even more mesmerizing. It was as though the music itself were alive, breathing and pulsing with emotion. The audience felt every change, every shift in tempo, every subtle inflection in the melody. They were not just hearing music, they were feeling it, living it, experiencing it in real time. The children were leaning on each other now, their eyes wide, mouths slightly open in amazement. They whispered quietly to each other, unable to contain their astonishment. "She's amazing," one said. "I want to play like her someday," another replied. For them, this was a magical moment, one that would inspire dreams and hopes for years to come. The adults, too, were completely captivated. Some could hardly sit still, their hands clasped together as they focused entirely on the girl. Even the most cynical or jaded guests were moved. They realized that they had witnessed something rare, something that could not be recreated easily. They felt privileged, almost humbled, to be part of this extraordinary experience. The music began to build toward a finale, but it was not loud or flashy. Instead, it grew in intensity, in depth, in emotional weight. Every note carried meaning, every chord added to the story, and every pause held significance. The girl had mastered the balance between technical skill and emotional expression in a way that left the audience completely stunned. A silence fell over the room as the final chord was played. It lingered in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. No one moved immediately. Some held their breath, afraid to break the spell. The air seemed charged with awe, disbelief, and admiration all at once. The young girl had transformed the room completely down, and then slowly the audience erupted into applause. The sound was loud, sincere, and unstoppable. People stood from their chairs, clapping, cheering, and even shouting words of praise. Tears were visible on many faces. The room that had once laughed at her was now completely in awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary, and their admiration was overwhelming. The girl rose from the piano bench, her expression calm and serene. She did not boast or seek attention. She simply nodded humbly, acknowledging the audience's appreciation. Her music had spoken louder than words ever could. She had not only captured attention, she had captured hearts. One note at a time, guests who had been judgmental at the start whispered apologies to each other. "I can't believe we laughed at her," one said quietly. Another nodded, "We were wrong. Completely wrong." The lesson was clear to everyone. Talent, heart, and passion cannot be judged by appearances. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room has the loudest voice. Even the professional musicians in the audience were silent, still processing what they had heard. They recognized something rare and profound, a combination of skill, emotion, and authenticity that is almost impossible to find. They exchanged glances, knowing that this was a moment they would remember forever. The children clapped enthusiastically, their eyes sparkling with admiration. They ran to the girl after the performance, thanking her and asking questions. Some wanted to know how she had learned to play. Others wanted to know if they could play like her one day. She smiled at them, answering softly and encouraging them without making herself the center of attention. The staff and organizers, who had been unsure what to expect from the evening, were now full of praise. They realized that the girl had done more than play music. She had transformed the event entirely. The gala had begun as a gathering of wealth and status, but it had ended as an unforgettable experience, united by the power of one person's talent and heart. As people continued to express their admiration, the girl quietly stepped back from the piano. She didn't linger to receive accolades. Her mission had been simple: to share her music, to tell a story, and to touch hearts. And she had done exactly that. She had taken a room full of judgment, doubt, and laughter and transformed it into a room full of respect, wonder, and admiration. It was a turning point that everyone in the room would remember for the rest of their lives. In those few minutes, the young girl had shown the power of perseverance, passion, and quiet confidence. She had reminded everyone that true talent does not need validation. It speaks for itself. By the end of the evening, the audience was still buzzing with excitement. Conversations no longer focused on status or gossip, but on the extraordinary performance they had just witnessed. They spoke of the music, the skill, and the heart behind every note. The girl had left a mark on everyone present, a mark that could not be erased by time or circumstance, and though she quietly left the piano, her presence lingered. The room had been changed forever. The lesson was clear: never judge a book by its cover, never underestimate someone based on appearances. The applause continued to echo through the grand ballroom, but the girl had already stepped back from the piano. Her hands rested quietly at her sides, her face calm and serene. She had not sought attention, yet she had captured the hearts of everyone present. The crowd, once filled with laughter and judgment, was now filled with awe and admiration. The transformation in the room was almost magical. Guests approached her, some hesitantly, unsure if they should disturb the moment. and others eagerly, wanting to express their appreciation. A few whispered apologies for their earlier laughter, some even bowing slightly in respect. "We were completely wrong about you," one of the older guests said quietly. Another added, "Your music. It was beyond anything we could have imagined." The girl simply smiled, nodding gently, her humility shining as brightly as her talent. The children who had been sitting in the corner rushed toward her, their eyes wide with excitement. "How do you play like that?" one asked. "Can you teach me someday?" Another inquired eagerly. The girl knelt down to speak with them, answering kindly and encouragingly. She spoke softly, explaining that practice, patience, and love for music were the keys. The children listened intently, inspired by someone who had shown them that greatness could come from quiet, determination, and genuine passion. The gala's organizers were amazed. They had expected a formal, controlled evening, but instead they had witnessed something extraordinary. The girl had not only played music. She had changed the entire atmosphere. The room, which had been full of ego and pretense, was now full of respect and heartfelt emotion. The organizers realized that they had been privileged to witness a rare talent that night, and they began planning ways to support her further. Even professional musicians in the audience were stunned. They whispered to each other, sharing their admiration and disbelief. "Her technique, it's flawless," one said. "And the emotion, it's like she's speaking directly to our souls," another replied. They could sense that she was not only technically skilled, but also profoundly authentic. There was no artificial showmanship, no exaggerated performance, just pure, honest, breathtaking talent. Word of her performance began spreading immediately. Guests pulled out their phones to record snippets of the music, sharing videos with friends and family. Within hours, posts began appearing on social media, praising the girl and her extraordinary ability. Videos of her performance went viral, drawing comments from people who were amazed by her skill and moved by the emotion in her music. The girl had become a symbol of talent hidden in unexpected places. A reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Some of the wealthiest and most influential guests reached out to her personally, offering opportunities, mentorship, and support. Invitations arrived for professional performances, music schools, and even private lessons with renowned musicians. Yet the girl remained humble. She accepted only what felt right to her, focusing not on fame or recognition, but on continuing to grow and share her music with sincerity and heart. The gala itself became a story of transformation. People who had arrived full of judgment and superiority left with a sense of humility and inspiration. They realized that talent and passion are not determined by wealth, appearance, or social status. The girl's performance had shown them the true power of art, to break down barriers, touch hearts, and unite people in ways that words alone cannot. Guests reflected on their own behavior. They had laughed at her when she first approached the piano, believing she did not belong in such a high-class environment. But now, they understood the lesson she had quietly taught them, that greatness cannot be measured by what is visible on the outside. True talent shines through effort, passion, and authenticity, and sometimes the most remarkable people are those who appear ordinary at first glance. The girl's story did not end with the gala. Opportunities opened for her one after another, but she remained grounded. She continued to practice daily, refining her skills and exploring new ways to express herself through music. She understood that her gift was not just for applause or recognition, it was a way to connect with people, to tell stories without words, and to inspire others to believe in themselves. News outlets and journalists reached out to cover her story, fascinated by the transformation she had created in that room. They wrote articles highlighting her journey, emphasizing her dedication, humility, and the emotional power of her music. The story resonated with people worldwide, inspiring young musicians and reminding everyone that perseverance and heart can overcome the most unlikely obstacles. The children who had watched her closely continued to look up to her. They shared her story at school, inspiring classmates and teachers alike. Some took up instruments themselves, motivated by the realization that even someone quiet and ordinary-looking could achieve something extraordinary. The girl became a symbol of hope and inspiration. showing that passion and dedication can open doors that might otherwise seem closed. Even the gala organizers made it a point to invite her back for future events, ensuring that she had platforms to share her music with wider audiences. She became more than a performer. She became a beacon of authenticity, showing the world the value of humility, focus, and the courage to follow one's passion despite obstacles or doubt. The audience who had first laughed now shared a story they would tell for years. They spoke of the girl who had taken their judgment, turned it upside down, and filled the room with beauty, emotion, and inspiration. They remembered the silence that fell after her first note, the gasps of awe as her music grew more powerful, and the tears that some couldn't help but shed. It was a memory that would stay with them, shaping how they viewed others and the way they approached life itself. The girl herself remained modest, never seeking fame or accolades. She understood that her gift was not about attention, it was about sharing, expressing, and connecting. She continued to play wherever she could, bringing the same emotion and heart to every audience. Her music touched more hearts with each performance, reminding everyone that true talent is a force that can inspire, heal, and change lives. Over time, she became known not just as a remarkable musician, but as a person whose presence reminded people of what truly matters. Her story was not only about music, it was about courage, humility, and the power of believing in oneself. She had taught a room full of wealthy, confident, and sometimes judgmental people that talent cannot be judged by appearances, and that sometimes the quietest person can have the loudest impact. Years later, those who had been present at the gala still spoke of the girl and her performance. They remembered the way the room had fallen silent, the way the music had taken over their hearts, and the way she had left them inspired, humbled, and amazed. It became a story passed down, a lesson in empathy, respect, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, rather than what they seem to be on the surface. The girl's journey continued, full of music, opportunities, and heartfelt connections. She never forgot that night, and neither did the audience. That evening became a turning point not just in her life, but in the lives of everyone who had witnessed it. Her performance had been more than music. It had been a reminder of the beauty of humility, the power of persistence, and the importance of believing in yourself even when others doubt you. Her story spread far and wide, inspiring countless others to pursue their passions and trust in their own abilities. People began to understand that talent is not defined by wealth, appearance, or status. True talent is measured by dedication, heart, and authenticity, the very qualities that the girl had displayed that night. And so, the girl who had once been underestimated became a symbol of hope, inspiration, and change. She had shown the world that greatness can come from anyone, anywhere, and that sometimes all it takes is one person to remind others of what truly matters. The music she played that night had not only stunned the audience, but had also left a lasting legacy, a reminder that talent, courage, and heart can touch lives in ways that nothing else can. Even long after the applause had faded and the gala ended, the story of the girl and her piano continued to inspire people. The memory of her music lived on in the hearts of those who had heard it, reminding them that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most unexpected places. And in that way, her music and her story became timeless. The room that had once laughed was now filled with respect. The girl had transformed a night of judgment into a night of revelation. She had turned doubt into admiration and disbelief into awe. And through it all, she had remained herself humble, focused, and true to her gift. Her legacy was not just in the notes she played, but in the lives she touched, the hearts she inspired, and the lessons she had quietly taught. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the power of believing in one's own abilities, no matter how unlikely the circumstances. And in the end, that was the most remarkable thing of all. One girl, a piano, and a room full of people forever changed by her music, her heart, and her unwavering courage.